Looks like our guests of honor are ready. Please welcome to the stage
Vincent Price and Roger Corman.
Hi everyone, can you hear us, or are we using a hand mic as well?
Okay.
You guys have to do everything. Okay, now can you hear us? All right. Well, thank you all for staying up late. It's way past my bedtime. I don't know about you, Roger.
Close.
So I asked Gwen a favor, which was, all these movies that Roger and my dad made together happened when I was little. And I've grown up seeing these movies, like most of you have, but they were made with a person I knew and loved, but I never got to see it happen. So I asked if we could start this Q&A before we turn it over to you, and you can ask Roger all of your Lovecraftian questions. Whether I could ask him some questions about what it was like on the set with my dad. So I know you've shared the story, first of all, of how you two met, but what did you know about my dad when you sent him the script? I mean, you told the story a little bit this morning, for those of you who were there, about why you thought, my dad would be a perfect fit, but what did you know of him?
Well, I had seen Vincent in a number of pictures. He was a young leading man. As he grew older, he became sort of a character leading man. There was a romantic quality to him, but it was always just a little bit offbeat. I remember particularly we discussed Dragonwyck, in which he gave a brilliant performance. And for Roderick Usher, the first of the Poe films, I felt Roderick Usher was a highly intelligent, extremely sensitive, and slightly off-key character. And Vincent clearly had, to me, the qualities of the intelligence and the ability to play a little bit away from the character. He was my first choice, and I sent him the script, and he liked the script and suggested we have lunch, and we talked about it, and we got along very well. Vincent was a very intelligent man. He graduated from Yale, and I think had a master's from the University of London, and he understood Poe very well, and his interpretation was very similar to mine. And one of the reasons we were able to shoot these pictures, including the Haunted Palace, they were all shot in a 15-day schedule. One of the reasons was that Vincent and I would discuss the character before shooting and work out motivations, key points, and so forth before shooting, so we didn't have to spend a lot of time on the set discussing this. The discussions had taken place before shooting. There was just a little bit of direction actually during the shooting. We just went straight forward and shot the films. And Vincent was just wonderful to work with.
So when you two met, obviously you were a young director at this point, and did you sense that my dad was comfortable turning it all over to you, or did he sort of feel like it was a mutual effort? I always got the sense that my dad never wanted to be a director. Many actors do want to be a director. My dad didn't. And I always got the sense that he sort of felt the director did the director's job, but I'm wondering, other than collaboration around the character, what other collaborations were there, and did he sort of make suggestions or stay really as an actor being directed by you?
It was to a certain extent mutual. we worked together as director and actor, but we agreed on all of the key points. And some things I brought up in pre-production, some things Vincent brought up as well. And between us, we had the character set before shooting, knowing, of course, that during shooting, things occur, something you planned that doesn't work out, then you've got to change it, or maybe you get a better idea during shooting, but 90% is what you planned.
Now, I'm doing an event, so this is a selfish question. I'm doing an event in Brooklyn at the end of the month where they're celebrating the connection between my dad's film career and his art expertise. And they're showing House of Usher. But I noticed even in Haunted Palace, you know, there's always these portraits and the art. And so did you guys talk about who was going to paint these and sort of what kind of art was going to be there? Because they're, in both of them, they're very sort of modern in a way.
No, not so much. The artist I chose, I remember, I've forgotten who did the House of Usher. I was sort of semi-well-known in beatnik circles at that time for doing work that was semi-realistic but had a weird quality to them. And I wanted the portraits to be portraits, but I didn't want them to look like photographs. And he was able, Bert was his name, he was able to bring this slightly mystical quality to the paintings.
And it was interesting because they have a very sort of 20th century feel to them in a way, you know, which, and they have a sort of a modern art. Did my dad like them? Did he like the choices?
Yes, he liked them. Particularly, he liked the paintings on Usher. Both he and I were, I remember, what picture, on the Pit and the Pendulum, we both felt that the paintings were a little bit, I had somebody else, were a little bit too realistic. We preferred the mystical quality that Bert was able to bring.
Cool. So the other thing I get asked all the time, and I never have the answer, is, you know, people say, how did your dad get along with Barbara Steele? How did your dad get along? Now, the only actresses that I knew were the ones who became family friends. Hazel Court became a dear, dear family friend. So I knew Hazel and Dawn very well. But the others, of course, were just co-stars. So, you know, many of them were much younger than my dad. And I know some of the women that I've met that he worked with later in his career always went on about what a gentleman he was. But what was your sense of who he really enjoyed, of the female actresses that he worked with, who he really enjoyed working with?
I think he got along very well with every of the actresses. I think particularly Hazel Court, and she had a smaller role, Barbara Steele, who had a great face but didn't have that much acting experience. And Vincent went out of his way to work and rehearse with her, with me, and it was of great help. So you could almost say that he was partially responsible for Barbara's performance in The Pit and the Pendulum, which was very good, as a matter of fact.
See, this is good. Now I'm not going to look dumb in the future. I'll be like, well, Roger says. So I always heard, and maybe it's apocryphal, maybe it isn't, that when Peter and Boris and my dad were all working together, this is the story I've heard, that Peter was very sort of improvisational and Boris was very by the book, and my dad was kind of the go-between. Will you tell us all about that?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I remember it very well. This was on The Raven, which we felt we were starting to repeat ourselves a little bit. So Dick Matheson, the writer, and I decided to bring a little bit of comedy into it. And the first day seemed to go very well. But before shooting, while they were lighting the set, on the second day, Boris came to me and he said, Roger, I am a trained actor. I learn my lines. I'm ready to come in and give a performance. Peter is all over the place, and he doesn't say what's in the script. I don't know when to come in. I don't know what's going on. I don't know how to work with this. And I thought, boy, this is the morning of the second day, and we're already in a problem here. So I said to Floyd Crosby, the cameraman, you can have a little extra time to light the set this morning. And I brought Peter and Boris and Vincent together and mentioned what Boris had said. And I said to Peter that I thought, which was true, I thought his improvisations were really wonderful. He had started with the Berliner Ensemble of Bertolt Brecht, which specialized in improvisation. And he'd been trained that way. As I say, I thought his improvisations were great. But I'd forgotten exactly what took place. But I said, essentially, Peter, what you're doing is great, but stay a little bit closer to the script. And I said to Boris, understand that Peter's training is different from yours, and he will now stay closer to the script, but you will have to know that he will not exactly give you your cues exactly the way you anticipated them. And Vincent was really, in that point, he became almost a co-director in the discussion, because Vincent could work both ways. He was really a wonderful actor, and he came in and helped me talk to Boris and Peter, and by the end of the discussion, everything was all right. And weirdly enough, by the end of the picture, Boris was starting to improvise himself.
Oh, that's cool. That's a great story. So, you made the first Poe film. Was there an anticipation that there would be more, or there was just going to be the one, and then?
No, there was no anticipation that there would be more. I simply wanted to make The Fall of the House of Usher. I'd been making a series of 10-day black and white films for American International and for another company, Allied Artists, and they'd put them together as a double bill, 2 films for the price of 1. And I was getting tired of this, and I thought it was also a sales gimmick that was wearing out. And when AIP asked me to do 2 more, I said, let me have a 15-day schedule, and let me shoot in color, and the picture will stand by itself. And Jim Nicholson, the head of the company, agreed. Sam Arkoff semi-agreed, but he said, and I said I wanted to do The Fall of the House of Usher, and Jim agreed, and Sam said, but Roger, he knew the story, he said, there's no monster in The Fall of the House of Usher. So thinking I've got to pull out of this some way, and I said, Sam, the house is the monster. And Sam said, okay. And I think there was a line somewhere that we put in to sort of justify this, and I think Vincent said, this line, what is the meaning of this line? I said, Vincent, the meaning of this line is how we got to make the picture.
That's great. So then, it becomes a success. Were they surprised? Were you surprised at how popular these films became?
I anticipated that the film would do well. Dick Matheson wrote a very good script. I knew with Vincent as the lead, my casting was right, and I felt the film would do well. It did better than we expected, and led to they wanted to do a second picture, and my choice would have been Masque of the Red Death. But Ingmar Bergman had done The Seventh Seal, which had some similarities to Masque of the Red Death. And I thought, if I do Masque of the Red Death, everybody will say I'm copying Ingmar Bergman. So I chose The Pit and the Pendulum, and it wasn't until the end of the series, a number of years later, when I finally said, okay, it's been long enough since The Seventh Seal, I can now do Masque of the Red Death. Incidentally, Seventh Seal, if you haven't seen it, is a masterpiece.
So, you know, again, from the perspective of this little girl, my mother was English, and I know you know my mother, and so we all of a sudden start going to London, and that was a very exciting development for me because we began going a lot, and I loved going, but I knew nothing about why they started being filmed in England. Why did you begin filming the Poe films, the last two Poe films in England?
The last two Poe films were shot in London for this reason. The pictures had been successful in the United States, but they'd been even more successful in England, in the United Kingdom, and the English distributors suggested that we take advantage of what they called the Eady Plan, which was an early form of subsidy, and that if I shot in England, I would have a slightly bigger budget because of the additional money from the Eady Plan. So it was really a decision with the English distributors to shoot in London. And I liked working there on Masque of the Red Death, so I came back and did one more, The Tomb of Ligeia, which was the last of the Poe films.
Got it. And so my dad used to say, and it was sort of a point of pride for him, he said you can only have certain number of Americans working in England in those days, and he was always very honored that he got obviously a visa or whatever, a work visa, and obviously you did, but there was a limit. And is that why you used somebody like Nicholas Roeg on that film, because you had to use somebody English?
Yes, also the rules were that way, and from a simply logical standpoint, I knew the English crews were very good. I knew there were many fine actors in England, and it made no particular sense to fly somebody in from Hollywood when there was somebody just as good, and in some cases better, in London.
And so that was the first time you'd worked with Nick Roeg, was on that film?
Yes, Nick was a young cameraman, and he won some award in England for the photography on Masque of the Red Death. And after Masque of the Red Death, he became a director and was a very successful director. And I always wondered, was Nick inspired to become a director by working with me, or did Nick feel if Roger can do it, anybody can do it?
Well, I mean, the cinematography on that film is so distinctive and so saturated, and somebody, I think Derek used the word lush. That is a really lush film, so distinctive. And I have a question about Jane Asher, and you know, this is a completely non-cinematography question. It's really just sort of a social question. I believe she was dating Paul McCartney when
Yeah.
And so was there a lot of hoopla around all of that when she was on the film because she was going out with Paul McCartney?
Jane and I used to have, she was very young, but she was so young I thought I should not date this girl. But we used to have lunch together at the studio every day. And on a Thursday, she said to me, a friend of hers was traveling through on Friday. He was from Liverpool and he was going to London. Could he come and watch us shoot, and we could all have lunch together on Friday? So I said, fine. And I got him a director's chair, and he sat next to me in the morning, and I talked with him a little bit. And then we had lunch, and I asked him during lunch, Jane says, you're on your way to London. What are you planning on doing in London? And he realized I didn't know who he was. And he said, well, I'm with a singing group from Liverpool, and we're going to be making our debut Saturday night in London. And at the end of the lunch, I said, well, Paul, good luck on your debut in London tomorrow night. And what it was, the Beatles were already the biggest group in England, but they were from Liverpool. They'd been playing Birmingham, Manchester, the Midlands, and so forth, but they had never played London. So it was a foregone conclusion that they were going to be a big success, and they were. I remember after wishing him good luck, I was reading one of the London papers Sunday morning, and a big headline, Beatles conquer London.
Wow, wow. I'd always wanted to hear that story, so thank you. So, I don't know obviously much about I know a lot about my dad's feeling about Poe. My dad, I think, felt very honored that he was sort of forever associated with Poe. So many people found out about my dad in 8th grade English class, because I think English teachers thought, oh, well, good, I can just put the film on, one of the Poe films, and it was very handy. And I think he used to tell me that Poe was the first American original voice that was acknowledged by Europeans. Obviously there were American voices like Nathaniel Hawthorne or Washington Irving. There were artists, but they were all, American writers and artists were considered sort of second-class citizens in the art world. Until Poe, because Poe's voice was so admired by European writers like Baudelaire and things like that, that he was the first writer or creative person from America to be respected by Europeans. And so my dad felt very, honored to be associated with Poe, but I don't have much of a sense of what he felt about Lovecraft. And so did you talk about Lovecraft as an author?
To a certain extent, but what you're saying about Poe is right, and particularly the French picked up on Poe, and they spearheaded the European acceptance of Poe as a writer. We did talk about the difference between Lovecraft and Poe. There are great similarities between both of them, but it seemed to me that Poe was, let us say, because he was also a poet, he was a little bit more poetic, and I also always felt he'd been working creatively with the concept of the unconscious mind, the way just a number of years later, Freud started working with it scientifically, whereas I think Lovecraft was more of a straight American horror writer. He had a rather classical style, and with just a little twist on the classical style, but he was more of a pure horror writer. I think they were both important writers, but they did have that difference. And in shooting The Haunted Palace, for instance, I thought about how do I do this picture a little bit differently from the Poe pictures. And they used the word lush on the photography of some of the Poe films, which was correct. And on that carried through to the costumes, the makeup, and the set dressings and everything. For Lovecraft, I wanted to bring it back, to mute it a little bit, to take away that quality and make it a little darker, both in the set dressings, the photography, the wardrobe, and so forth. And I approach Lovecraft, and you can see, if you look carefully, you'll see there is a little bit of a difference. Same cameraman, Floyd Crosby, who was shooting the Poe films, but Floyd, working with me, took a slightly different look at Lovecraft, and you can see just a little bit of difference between the way The Haunted Palace was shot and the way the Poe films were shot.
Well, I know that you guys are all here because of your love of Lovecraft, and so I think we have some time to do Q&As from all of you guys. I don't know if there's a mic that's going to go around, or you just have to stand up and shout. But if you want to ask a question, is there a mic to go around, or somebody running to get a mic? All right, so if you shout, I can then ask the question so the whole audience can hear it. Derek.
So Vincent Price worked a lot with Elijah Cook, and Elijah Cook's in this film as well. What was it like working with Elijah Cook and watching those two work together?
They worked together very well. Matter of fact, Vincent worked together very well with actors in every film, and particularly on The Raven, as I said, he brought the actors together. Elisha Cook had a strange quality to him. There was sort of a surface weakness within Elisha's personality that came through with, at the same time, a steely quality beneath the exterior weakness. And it was a very interesting combination and made him a really very good character actor. Vincent and I both got along with him very well.
Thank you.
Hi, I just want to say it's an honor to have you here. You're a filmmaking legend. You mean so much to independent filmmakers, and it's really impressive how you work with time constraints and budgetary constraints, and yet, like a movie like what we saw tonight is not just a bunch of talking heads. There's these gorgeous tracking shots, really elegant camera moves, and I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about, how much of that is just working with the same cameraman so that you have a really efficient shooting style, and how you're able to get these nice tracking shots.
Well, that was partially part of my preparation. All of these pictures were shot in 3 weeks, and they featured a great deal of interiors, particularly in the House of Usher. Almost the entire picture was within the house, and I was trying to find a way to not repeat myself. I felt the film can have a claustrophobic look if I shoot it in a standard way. So I started to develop a style in which I used a lot of tracking shots, a lot of dolly shots, particularly being able to move from room to room to room, and then intercut that with the traditional long shot, medium shot, get the close-ups, and go to the next scene. A matter of fact, not so much here, but the one I always liked the best was in Masque of the Red Death, where Poe had described Prince Prospero taking Francesca, Jane Asher, through a series of colored rooms. And Danny Haller, the art director, and I worked out a way to put all the colored rooms together, and then on the dividing between them, we took the flat and worked it out so it came to a point, and the whole sequence was just one long tracking shot from room to room to room, in which we just moved, and they played the entire sequence in this one dolly shot, which I felt I had hit about as much as I could do with that one.
Wow.
So I am now armed with a wireless mic, so if you raise your hands, I'll come on to you. Move my little feet to get
What was the story on the title? Because obviously it's a case of Charles Dexter Ward, basically, but it's the title is Edgar Allan Poe, The Haunted Palace. What was the rationale and what was the story of how it ended up being called that?
It was a story that you might say is typical of distributors. I had felt I had done a number of the Poe films, and they asked me to do another one, and I thought I was beginning to repeat myself, and I suggested, I think Lovecraft is somebody you're not thinking about. I think he's a very good writer. I'd like to break from the Poe films because there's enough similarity between them so it will still fit within the series, but there's enough difference so that it will stand alone. And they agreed, and so I set up to shoot the picture. During the shooting of the picture, they did some sort of, and I'm not certain what this amounted to, but they came to me and said, our market research indicates that Lovecraft is not as known as Poe, so we want to put a Poe title on the Lovecraft film. And I said, well, this is insanity. There was a good title from The Haunted Palace was a poem by Poe, and they suggested The Haunted Palace, and I think I slipped somewhere into the script. I don't even remember, some reference or something to Haunted Palace or something. But essentially, it was a Lovecraft film retitled by the distributors because they had more faith in Poe's name. When the film did well, they then started becoming aware of Lovecraft, and I went ahead and did the Dunwich Horror, but by that time, I wanted to move to a different type of work as a director. So Danny Haller, who had been my art director, who was very good, made his debut as the director on the Dunwich Horror.
And the same thing, of course, happened on my dad's movie with Michael Reeves, The Witchfinder General. And when it was released in the United States, they called it The Conqueror Worm, which is also a poem by Edgar Allan Poe.
I had forgotten that.
Yeah,
You're
it had
right.
nothing
Yes.
to do with.
They did the same thing
Right.
again.
Daniel Haller's Dunwich Horror is one of my personal favorites. Some people think it's funny, but I just love it. I think it's great.
I was wondering what attracted you to the story of Charles Dexter Ward. It's always been a favorite of mine, for sure. What drew you to it as the first Lovecraft you did?
I didn't hear totally the
What
question.
was it about Charles Dexter Ward that made you want to choose that as the first Lovecraft film?
I thought the structure was very good, and I thought the concept of going back through generations, and I thought it was emblematic of much of Lovecraft's work. And at the same time, there were some similarities to Poe, so I felt I was able to break from the Poe series, go to Lovecraft, but still have something that was original with Lovecraft, but had a little bit of connection with what Poe's work was. So I was able to make, it seemed to me, the logical picture to make the transition with.
I love there's some wonderful, wonderful moments in there when they first get into Arkham, and you always start to get a little bit of sort of intimate feel in there as well. Yeah.
I know you talked about how this film and all the Poe films were made in 15-day schedules, and as a filmmaker myself, it's so amazing to watch what you're able to accomplish on such a short schedule and a tight budget. And I was wondering if you could share some of your working methods over the years that you've used as a director to make a film under such tight constraints, schedule and budget-wise, and still deliver something so great.
The answer really is in pre-production. All of the Poe films had 3-day schedules, 3-week schedules, 15 days. And I felt in order to make a film of the quality and complexity I was looking for on what was essentially a B-picture schedule, the only way to do it was to have as much planned as possible in pre-production. So I didn't have to spend time on the set figuring things out. From a director's standpoint, I sketched all the shots. Now, a number of directors have started with me, and I've always told them, you have to sketch all your shots. The fact of the matter is, I never really sketched all my shots. I'd get up through about 80 or 90%, and I'd say, well, there are a lot of close-ups. I don't need to sketch that. I just know there'll be a close-up. Weirdly enough, Marty Scorsese was the only guy, I think, who really did sketch 100% of his shots. So from a directorial standpoint, it was having all of my shots set in advance. From working with the actors, I talked with the actors about the characterizations, the motivation, and so forth, and rehearsed with the actors, so it didn't require big discussions during a 15-day schedule of discussing things with the actors that were already discussed. The actual direction during shooting was really detail work because things had been worked out. The same thing with the art direction, same thing with the cameraman and everything, working out as much as I could in pre-production, knowing, and I have always said this to the young directors who started with me, knowing that even though you have everything worked out, you'll never really shoot the picture exactly the way you worked it out. You get on the set, something you planned doesn't work, you've got to make a change. Or you get a better idea during shooting, you make a change. But you'll end up generally 80–90% with the picture you planned, and then the rest are the changes you make during the film, and you accept the fact that you plan everything but allow for some improvisation, some change during shooting.
Do you have a favorite memory of working with Vincent Price over your run of movies with him?
Actually, I thought the very first picture, Usher, Vincent was absolutely right on. He was perfect as Roderick Usher. I thought it was a brilliant performance. And one of the later performances, Prince Prospero in Masque of the Red Death, he was very good. I think those two performances, then coming back to the Haunted Palace, he understood the similarities between Lovecraft and Poe, but he also understood the differences, and he was able to convey that in his performance. And I think he gave a very good performance in the Haunted Palace.
About 2 years ago, we had Barbara Steele came out and sat with us and talked a little bit about, which one? You guys remember which film we showed? Nobody? Black Sunday.
So it seems like a lot of directors always have some kind of fun or hear a story about sometime where they pulled a fast one or pulled some kind of shenanigan just to get something done, like Ed Wood stealing the props at Universal Studios and then getting them back in time just so they wouldn't notice. Do you have any kind of I gotta imagine you got at least a few of those. Maybe you could expand on one of them?
He said that a lot of directors have a story about some sort of fast one, like Ed Wood taking the props and getting them back just in time. Do you have any sort of funny stories of something that you slid under the wire, or, you know?
Well, I have one actually that I did, and it was with Ron Howard on his first film. We were talking about various things because he'd been an actor and had never directed before. And I said, you know, sometimes when I'm shooting exteriors, and the film he directed, Grand Theft Auto, was almost entirely exteriors, you may find yourself in an area where there are hills or something, and you're getting the long shot, and you're losing the light here because the sun is going behind a hill over there. If you get the long shot here, what you can do, you can move up the side of the hill and get the other shots, because the higher on the hill, the sun will still be there. And Ron, I was talking with Ron later on, a number of years later, and he said, I remembered when you told me that, and I thought, well, that's a really interesting, good way to shoot if you're in trouble on a cheap picture, but it doesn't apply for a big picture. But he said, I was directing a big picture, and I was losing my light, and I did what you said. I moved up the side of the hill on a multi-million-dollar picture to grab what was left of the light.
Oh yeah. In the Poe films, in like Masque of the Red Death, did he also have like the same deep understanding of the character as the other Edgar Allan Poe films?
Yes. Vincent really, as I say, was a highly intelligent man, and he prepared really diligently for every role. He understood the difference between, say, Roderick Usher and Prince Prospero. Prince Prospero, of course, being a great lord, but at the same time, having certain theories. I brought a certain religious quality into it, and Vincent played Prospero's belief that essentially the Masque of the Red Death is an indication that God is dead, and he played Prospero, with Prospero basing all of his actions on the basis that God is dead and we are now free to do whatever we want. And Vincent understood that, played that, and it was an example of how he was able to move from one character to another.
And we probably have time for one more question. Right there in the middle? Okay. Yeah. The films that you directed with Vincent Price are among my favorites in the entire world. And we're very proud that we got you to come to this little festival of ours.
Hello. You mentioned earlier that at least early on, Boris Karloff wasn't terribly comfortable with improvisation. I wondered then if you could tell me a bit about how he was during the filming of The Terror. Because as I understand it, his portion of that film was done very quick and dirty with just the last few days of his shooting schedule on a different movie. So what was it like working with him on that?
Well, The Terror was only shot because it rained on a Sunday when I was planning to play tennis. And I was finishing up The Raven with Vincent, Boris, and Peter, and having nothing, I had one more week to work, and having nothing to do on Sunday, I called a writer friend of mine, Leo Gordon, and I said, you know, I've got these big sets from The Raven, and I can keep them for a couple of days after we finish shooting, before the studio brings in another picture. If we can work out a storyline today, you've got, during this 1 week to shoot, what I'll take is, I'll take Vincent or Boris or somebody to play the lead, and I'll have those sets for 2 days, next Monday and Tuesday. So he started writing, and I remember Monday morning, I went in and talked to Vincent and asked him if he'd like to come back and play 2 days to play the lead. And Vincent was a great art lover and historian. He said, I'd be happy to, but I'm going on an art lecture tour. So I went to the next dressing room and said to Boris, would you be interested in coming back for 2 days? And Boris said, fine, I'll come back. And what Boris understood, he was going to work 2 days. What I knew was that he had to be the star of the picture, so he had to be in a lot of scenes in 2 days, and I think I shot 30 pages, 15 pages a day for 2 days with Boris as the lead. And Boris, he was a good guy, but he sort of joked on the second day. He said, Roger, we're all lucky you didn't ask me to come 3 days. I'm going to barely make it through the first 2 days. But then I went to Jack Nicholson, who was a friend of mine, and said, look, if you'll come in and play the young guy in the castle with Boris, I've only got the money and the sets for 2 days of shooting. Boris is going back to London. You'll work with him for 2 days, and then when I get more money, I'll shoot the rest of the picture, and you will emerge as the actual lead, although Boris will get first star billing. And I remember Jack said, that's fine. He said, but can Sandy play the leading lady? Sandra was his wife. He said, we really need the money, and if I could get her in the picture too. I said, sure, she can be the lead. So it ended up with shooting in bits and pieces, because I was a member of the Directors Guild, and I was shooting with, and I worked with the full union crew and Directors Guild assistants the 2 days I shot, but for the rest of it, I only had a little bit of money. So Francis Coppola came in and shot a couple of days. Then I think Monty Hellman later came in and shot a couple of days. Jack Hill came in and shot a couple of days. And on the last day of shooting, Jack Nicholson came to me and he said, Roger, every idiot in Hollywood has directed part of this film. Let me direct the last day. I said, go ahead, Jack, you direct the last day. the film doesn't quite hang together, incidentally.
What a wonderful story to end on. When back in the days when you recorded TV on VHS tapes, I recorded The Terror, and I played it so much I wore out the tape. And it was maybe the second or third DVD I bought when DVD players first came out.
Well, actually, there's an additional final note to this. When we cut it all together, it really didn't make particular sense. And also, it seemed fairly dull. And by that time, I was shooting another Poe picture, and I had a set. So I arranged for the crew to stay over, and I paid them for 2 hours of work. And I shot one scene where Dick Miller plays Boris's valet, and Jack, of course, plays the young guy who comes to the castle. And Jack throws Dick against the wall and says, "I've been lied to ever since I came to this castle. Tell me what's going on." At which Dick then tells and pulls the whole story together. But in order to make, I thought it was a little dull. Boris, in good faith, had played the Baron von Lepp. And so in this last 2 hours of shooting, we exposed the fact that he has actually killed the Baron, and he is an imposter posing as the Baron. And when Boris saw the film, he said, I played the Baron in good faith. I didn't know I was going to be an imposter. And I said, Boris, I didn't know it either when he saw it.
You guys, what an honor for all of us to be here with Roger Corman. Please give him a big hand.